The fragile peace that had settled over North American trade was shattered with a single explosive announcement. President Donald Trump declared a complete and immediate suspension of all trade talks with Canada. Markets reacted with shock. The cause of this sudden diplomatic freeze was Canada's proposed digital services tax. The president characterized the tax as a direct and blatant attack on the United States. He labeled Canada a very difficult country to trade with, a sharp shift from the cooperative CUSMA era. This was the opening salvo of a costly trade war between close allies. The White House reaction was swift and severe, leaving little room for negotiation. Trump's declaration was a clear threat to the economic web binding the two nations. For years, goods services had flowed across the 49th parallel with relative ease, fueling industries and supporting millions of jobs on both sides. Now that vital artery of commerce was under threat. The president's frustration was palpable. His administration viewed Canada's digital tax as a targeted assault on American technological dominance. A debate over tax policy turned into a battle for national pride and economic supremacy. The world watched with bated breath as the situation deteriorated. The suspension of talks effectively closed the door on any immediate diplomatic resolution. Instead of dialogue, the air was filled with threats of punitive economic measures. President Trump warned that new sweeping tariffs on Canadian goods could be imposed within 7 days, a timeline that left little opportunity for cooler heads to prevail. Retract the digital tax or face the full force of American economic pressure. This ultimatum pushed Canada into a corner, forcing its government to choose between defending policy and protecting its economy. Canada's decision to introduce a digital services tax was not made in a vacuum. Like many other countries around the world, the Canadian government was grappling with a modern economic challenge: how to fairly tax massive multinational technology companies that generate substantial revenue from Canadian users, but have a limited physical presence within the country. These digital giants, many of them US-based, were seen as benefiting from the Canadian market without contributing a proportional share to the nation's tax base. The proposed tax was designed to level the playing field, ensuring that these hugely profitable corporations contributed to the public services and infrastructure from which they indirectly benefited. For Ottawa, it was a matter of fiscal fairness and national sovereignty. However, Washington saw the situation through a completely different lens. From the perspective of the Trump administration, Canada's digital tax was a discriminatory measure aimed squarely at America's most successful and innovative companies: Google, Amazon, Facebook. A prominent US tech lobbying group estimated that the tax could cost these companies as much as $3 billion annually. A staggering sum that was framed as an unjust transfer of wealth from American innovators to the Canadian treasury. The US government viewed itself as the defender of its corporate champions against what it perceived as protectionist and predatory foreign tax policies. This fundamental clash of perspectives created an unbridgeable divide. The initial threat of tariffs quickly became a harsh reality. Despite Canada's attempts to explain its position, the Trump administration moved forward with its punitive measures. The first major blow landed on August 1, 2025. On this day, President Trump announced a staggering increase in tariffs on most Canadian goods, raising the rate from an already high 25% to an unprecedented 35%. This move was particularly shocking because it came even after Canada had signaled a willingness to negotiate, and had in fact agreed to withdraw its controversial digital services tax in a bid to avert a full-blown trade war. The gesture of goodwill was ignored, and the tariffs were imposed anyway, indicating that the conflict had moved beyond the initial dispute. The escalation was relentless and methodical. The 35% tariff was not the beginning, but the culmination of aggressive trade actions. The groundwork had been laid earlier with sectoral tariffs targeting Canada's vital steel, aluminum, and automotive industries. But the blanket 35% increase was a declaration of all-out economic warfare. This broad-based approach was designed to inflict maximum economic pain and force Canada into further concessions, transforming the trade relationship from one of partnership to one of coercion. The timing of the tariff hike was a strategic move designed to exert maximum pressure. By implementing the increase at the height of the summer shipping season, the administration ensured the impact was immediate and acute. Supply chains that had been finely tuned over decades were thrown into chaos overnight. Faced with crippling tariffs and a rapidly deteriorating economic outlook, the Canadian government was forced into a strategic retreat. On September 1, 2025, Ottawa announced removing most counter tariffs on US imports. it was a significant concession meant to de-escalate the conflict and show good faith. The Canadian government recognized the U.S. approach under CUSMA, allowing most Canadian goods tariff-free, and Canada reciprocated by lifting many retaliatory duties on American products. This decision was painful. It meant surrendering a key bargaining chip, but it was deemed necessary to prevent further damage to the Canadian economy. However, this was not a complete surrender. While Canada removed the majority of counter-tariffs, it strategically maintained them on a few key sectors: steel, aluminum, automobiles. The decision was deliberate and pointed. These were the industries where the U.S. refused CUSMA exemptions and kept heavy tariffs. By keeping counter-tariffs on these goods, Canada sent a clear message. It was willing to seek peace, but it would not stand by idly while its critical manufacturing sectors were targeted. The economic fallout from the escalating trade war was not abstract. It was starkly visible in the economic data flowing from both nations. The numbers painted a grim picture of the damage being inflicted. In 2024, the year before the major tariff hikes, the United States and Canada shared a massive and deeply intertwined trading relationship. Canada stood as America's second-largest trading partner. That year, Canada had purchased $349.4 billion worth of U.S. goods. Canada exported $412.7 billion to the United States. That left a trade surplus of $63.3 billion for Canada. That surplus had long been a point of contention for President Trump. The impact of the tariffs was felt most acutely in the Canadian labor market. Official statistics revealed the Canadian economy shed 40,800 jobs in July 2025 alone. This was a significant shock, directly linked to the trade dispute. The Bank of Canada confirmed sectoral tariffs on steel aluminum cars hit the manufacturing sector particularly hard. Companies sharply pulled back on hiring. Uncertainty forced businesses to pause investments and lay off workers, freezing economic activity. The national unemployment rate held at a multi-year high of 6.9%. The pain was not distributed evenly. Young people were disproportionately affected. Youth unemployment soared to 14.6%. That was the highest level since September 2010, excluding the pandemic years. Beyond the macroeconomic data and high-level political disputes, the trade war inflicted a very personal and immediate toll on small business owners, particularly within Indigenous communities in Canada. These entrepreneurs often operate on thin margins and rely heavily on cross-border e-commerce. They were hit by a sudden, devastating policy change. The Trump administration suspended the de minimis threshold for imports from Canada. Previously, Canadian businesses could ship packages under $800 duty-free to U.S. customers. That streamlined process was the lifeblood for many small-scale artisans and producers who had built a loyal customer base south of the border. The suspension was a crippling blow. Suddenly, every package faced complex customs clearance procedures and a range of new tariffs. Tariffs could be as high as 10 to 50% of product value. Those costs erased profit margins and priced out American buyers. The administrative burden alone was daunting for a small operation, navigating customs paperwork, calculating duties, dealing with shipping delays. Trade simplicity vanished overnight, replaced by bureaucracy and punitive costs. Many Indigenous businesses made the painful decision to halt all sales to the United States: tribal spirit drums, cedar lily beads. Both publicly announced they could no longer ship to American customers. These were not large corporations with legal departments. They were often family-run businesses sharing culture through craft. The U.S. market was not just revenue, it was a vital connection to a broader community of customers. This highlighted the asymmetric impact of the trade war. Large corporations might absorb or navigate the tariffs, small businesses could not. For Indigenous entrepreneurs, the policy was an existential threat. It severed a crucial economic lifeline and cut them off from a market they'd spent years developing. Stopping exports was a last resort, self-preservation against an impossibly hostile system. A poignant example of how grand trade strategies hurt the smallest and most vulnerable players. While Canada's economy bore the initial and more visible brunt of the trade war, the economic pain was by no means a one-sided affair. The United States also began to feel the negative repercussions of the tariffs, as the deeply integrated North American supply chain began to buckle under the strain. American manufacturers relying on Canadian raw materials and components saw costs rise sharply. The U.S. automotive industry is built on a just-in-time system, where parts and vehicles cross the border multiple times during assembly. Tariffs hit Canadian steel, tariffs hit aluminum, tariffs hit auto parts. Those tariffs disrupted the delicate cross-border supply dance, raising production costs for American carmakers, costs that were then passed on to U.S. consumers as higher prices. American consumers began feeling the pinch in daily life. Canada supplies lumber for housing construction, Canada supplies various food products, Canada supplies energy. As Canada's counter-tariffs took hold on certain U.S. goods, and American tariffs raised the price of Canadian imports, the cost of living for ordinary Americans started creeping up. The price of a new home rose, the price of renovation projects rose. Both increases were driven by tariffs on Canadian softwood lumber. Grocery prices for certain food items went up. While each price increase may have been small, their cumulative effect eroded purchasing power for American families, an unintended consequence of protectionist policy. As the dust from the initial tariff explosions begins to settle, the future of the U.S.-Canada trade relationship hangs precariously in the balance. The events of 2025 have inflicted deep wounds that will not heal quickly. The trust that once formed the bedrock of this partnership has been severely eroded. What was once considered the world's most successful and peaceful trading relationship has been exposed as fragile. The path forward is clouded with uncertainty. Will the two nations be able to repair the damage and return to a spirit of cooperation? Or has a new era of managed and often contentious trade begun? The answer will have profound implications for the entire North American continent. The immediate future will likely be defined by a tense and uneasy truce. This creates a state of persistent, low-grade conflict that could easily flare up again. The shocking trade war of 2025 serves as a stark warning. Even the closest of allies cannot take their economic partnership for granted.